Great Britain has achieved something that Germany can only dream of. The majority of Britons have been vaccinated at least once. Shops and pubs are open, although the shops are open here as well. However, with a tough lockdown and most fatalities in Europe, the country has paid a heavy price for it. In the first year of the pandemic, Britain was one of Europe's problem children. Initially extremely carefree in dealing with the pandemic, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's assessment was closer to Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro than to his European counterparts, whom he had already turned his back on as a result of Brexit. Despite his own COVID-19 illness, which brought him to a London intensive care unit in April 2020, the head of government drove a half-hearted dodging course. This mismanagement contributed to the fact that the UK today has the highest corona death toll in Europe with 127,000 victims. In early January 2021, Brexit Island appeared to be on its knees by the virus. In the southwest of England, around the metropolis of London, the mutant B117 was created, which is significantly more contagious than the original coronavirus. Before the variant gained the upper hand in Europe and is now also responsible for the worrying development of the third wave in Germany, it drove up the numbers in Great Britain. 7-day incidence of over 600, over 50,000 new infections over several days, and 500 deaths, a health system right in front of collapse. But then the government of Boris Johnson managed something that Chancellor Angela Merkel and the 16 prime ministers of the federal states have so far failed, some say miserably, to break the third wave. Two factors were decisive for this. First, a strict lockdown. In England, a tightened lockdown came into force at the beginning of January, the core of which was de facto a curfew. The bright yellow warning sign with "Stay home" on every lectern was to be taken literally by the British. Home office wherever possible, do not leave the apartment without a valid reason. Schools, shops, bars, sports facilities, cultural institutions, everything has been closed where people from different households can meet. The regional governments of Scotland and Wales also followed suit and reacted with very similar lockdowns to B117. For months, the British have lived and still live with much grumbling, with much tougher lockdown measures than ever applied in Germany. Now they started opening up, but while Germans, for example, can fly unhindered in the sun, the British are strictly forbidden from traveling abroad and will remain so for the time being. And second, a successful vaccination campaign with ups and downsides that has. The vaccines were approved by AstraZeneca and Biotech via emergency approval and used immediately in Brexit Great Britain with a certain degree of satisfaction. Now in mid-April, the Moderna vaccine is added. In total, more than 32 million people in the UK have had a first vaccination to date, well over half of adults. A good 7.5 million people have already injected the second dose necessary for complete protection. Great Britain was hardly deterred by the quarrels over AstraZeneca. A different vaccine is now to be taken only for those under 30. According to the British government, all Brits over 50 have already been offered a corona vaccination. The British government announced this week that it will soon be the turn of the first under 50-year-olds. The German government spokesman Steffen Seibert commented somewhat sourly on the successful British vaccination campaign, pointing out that it was also achieved by the fact that Great Britain received vaccines from the EU but did not send any vaccines to the EU. And it may sound sourly, but it's still the truth. The bottom line is that lockdown and vaccination together led to the current situation. In Great Britain, the 7-day incidence on April 14th was 17.3. In Germany, it was 153.2. 1 day later, it was 160.1. The daily registered new infections have fallen to almost 2,500. In Germany, They are consistently increasing to over 29,000. That was on April 15th. The number of those who died from and with COVID fell to 23 a day. In Germany, 294 people last died within 24 hours. That was also the numbers from April 15th. There are still around 2,500 COVID-19 patients in the British clinics. In Germany alone, there are 4,688 in the intensive care units. In mid-February, when the situation in Great Britain had already eased significantly, Prime Minister Boris Johnson showed his fellow citizens the way out of the lockdown, which he described as cautious but irrevocable. The strict corona restrictions, which have been in force since the beginning of the year, will be gradually lifted until the British have all freedoms again in July 2021. Open schools since March 8th, outdoor catering, hairdressers and shopping since April 12th. Indoor dining, museums and possibly trips from May 17th. On June 21st, all lockdown measures are to be lifted. It is presumably such concrete perspectives that the majority of people in Great Britain share the restrictions that still apply, including the contact limit in the private sector. The 30 authorized mourners at Prince Philip's funeral on April 17th were the maximum number allowed for each funeral without exception, even for the royal family. Occasional anti-lockdown demos gather a few hundred protesters and not 10,000 angry citizens like in this country. The police in England also breaks up illegal parties of young people every weekend, but in general, the resistance is limited. However, it quickly becomes expensive on the island due to high fines. The openings will inevitably lead to more infections and deaths again. Not only epidemiologists are certain of this. The Prime Minister, who has developed into a great warning during the pandemic, also pointed this out during the recent easing. If we open up, the inevitable result will be that we will get more infections again, and that combined with more hospitalizations and deaths, he said on the BBC. Although he himself was looking forward to be on the pub on the day it opened, which he waived because of the death of Prince Philip, but warned all visitors to observe the applicable distance rules there. Because it was the strict lockdown in Great Britain and not the vaccinations which primarily led to the reduction in infections. Epidemiologist Sebastian Funk from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine confirms this point of view on Deutschlandfunk. The hard lockdown has definitely made a difference. The effect is probably still stronger than that of the vaccinations. And he goes on to say, so the vaccinations currently protect primarily against the severe cause, but the lockdown is pushing back the infections. Therefore, the easing is linked to security measures. The opening of the schools is connected with regular corona tests. For the vacationists, there should be a traffic light system according to which, depending on the infection situation in the travel destination, differently strict test and quarantine rules apply on return. And only 2 households and a maximum of 6 people are allowed to go to the pub. The last corona measures will probably only be lifted in Great Britain if there is stable herd immunity. That will take a while because of the highly contagious virus mutant B.1.1.7. 80% of the population must have acquired immunity. In the case of less contagious pathogens, experts say a proportion of 60 to 70% is sufficient to protect all the rest from infections. Scientists from University College London have made the optimistic calculation that in mid-April more than 70% of British people would be immune to SARS-CoV-2. Thanks to the rapid vaccination rate, every second British person has already received a first vaccination. Add to this the over 4 million who have an infection behind them and are also immunized as a result, but usually only for a year, as well as around 10% with natural immunity to the virus. This gives an immunity rate of 73.4%. However, other researchers have doubts about the reliability of the modeling approach used to produce this analysis. It has already led to overly optimistic corona predictions in the past. In any case, the considerations and calculations of the scientists only play a subordinate role for the British government's easing plans. If the vaccination rate can be maintained, herd immunity will in any case be established more quickly than in the EU countries. Although there are a few points I have to add in the end. First of all, the vaccination process definitely has to do with getting millions of doses from the continent and not sending anything to the continent. So that was a very nationalistic, egoistic approach they chose compared to the others. The second thing is it must be probably part of the political system. A lockdown like in the UK would not even stand our courts here in Germany, most probably. We would have to change a lot of laws, and in a federal system, it's different than in a devolution system. And the states have a much more say about this. And the government, the general government, is trying to bring up a law that forces an emergency lockdown in a certain case, but all the states have to agree to this via our second chamber, and that is a very heated discussion at the moment. And that's why the lockdown, of course, was not as tough as in the UK. I could go to a hairdresser twice already since they reopened here. I could go to shops with an appointment. Now the numbers have risen again because of B117. That is the main reason why the numbers are rising here. And of course, it was first in Britain, and so they are the first out of that one again. But it started here much later, and of course, the more contagious B117 had consequences here much later than the UK. That's why you can see some time shift here. We are experiencing now kind of what happened in Britain earlier because it happened there. And so you can't really compare the numbers which are right now. You would have to compare them to the time when the B117 wave really hit Britain. And so you have to be careful with the numbers and with the comparison there. But I keep my fingers crossed for every country to get out of this mess. But in the end, we will only be safe if the whole planet will have herd immunity. Otherwise, we will have to deal with that over and over again, and with new mutations, and they are the most dangerous part of this. And if you had corona, I had it more than a year ago, and I'm quite sure I have no antibodies anymore. They will definitely see that when it's my time to be vaccinated. But even with the vaccines, every company thinks that you have to be vaccinated with a booster vaccination every year. So more than a year, and you can count them out. But there's so many details. I'll leave it at that at the moment. I told you what I think about Britain. That was from German sources, of course. But of course, that is what is happening and what has happened. So first, Boris Johnson, really bad job, and then quite a good job from point of view of his people. The outside thinks a little bit differently about this, but good job for keeping your people safe. And if you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel. Auf Wiedersehen.